So in this video, we're going to look at DNA and DNA structure and how this all relates together. And so DNA was really discovered by Watson and Crick, James Watson and Francis Crick, but there's a couple other people that were involved in it. We're going to look at some of the experiments and a lot of experiments that were done before these guys even got there to kind of help them discover it. So here's the deal with DNA. The building blocks of DNA are nucleotides. That's the monomer of DNA. Okay. So it's DNA is really just a big polymer. And so the nucleotides consist of 3 parts. There's a 5-carbon sugar. And in the case of DNA, it's called deoxyribose. And then there's the nitrogenous base. So it's based in nitrogen. And those are the most, there's actually lots of them, but the most common ones are A's, T's, C's, and G's, and that's usually what we refer to them as. There's 4 bases. There's actually a few other ones, little secret knowledge there. And then the last thing is a phosphate group. Okay, that's just the functional group, the phosphate group. Okay, so let's look at those nitrogenous bases. So there's pyrimidines and purines, okay? And so pyrimidines have a single ring structure. And they are and so there's 2 of them. This is cytosine, and this is thymine, and you actually don't have to know them. You have to know the names of them. You don't have to recognize their structure. Like, I'm never going to ask you, what is this? And you have to tell me it's cytosine. Okay? And then there's purines, which have a double ring structure. And these are guanine, which binds with cytosine, and that's actually a really cool experiment where they figured out that there's the same number of C's as there are G's in every piece of DNA, and there's the same number of A's as there are T's in DNA. And this is adenine, same adenine from ATP. And so we're going to go ahead and look at DNA structure. So how does this all fit together? So DNA is this double helix shape, so we're going to write some things about it. Okay, so it's a double helix. That was kind of the big thing. For a long time, they thought it was a triple helix. So it's 2 strands. So it is double-stranded. There are 2 strands of DNA, and they complement each other. And we think a lot of times it's like a twisted ladder. It kind of looks like that. And so the sides of this ladder are sugar and phosphate, and they just alternate. So it's a sugar and then a phosphate. It's a sugar and then a phosphate. Okay, and the rungs of the ladder are the 2 bases, and we know, hopefully we should know, that A pairs with T and G pairs with C. Okay, and the thing that holds them together is our old friend, the hydrogen bond. And there's so many hydrogen bonds that it actually can hold DNA together, even though hydrogen bonds aren't very strong. So hydrogen bonds hold bases together. Okay? And there's actually, I'm going to show you in this picture here, this molecule here is an adenine, so that's an A, actually, and this is a T. And the only reason I know that is because there's 2 hydrogen bonds between an A and a T. And there's actually 3 hydrogen bonds between a G and a C. Okay, and this one up here happens to be a G on this side and a C on this side. So it doesn't matter what side. The code is actually what tells you what protein you're going to make. Okay, that's actually what tells you, that's the gene part, like the order and the code that they go in. But G's always line up with C's and A's always line up with T's. And you can see that that base is attached to the sugar, and then there's a phosphate. Okay. So let's kind of continue to look at this. Well, another thing we say about DNA is that they have anti-parallel strands, okay? So there's that base attached to the sugar, and then there's my phosphate. And what we say is that this one actually is the 5' end, and this one's the 3' end. DNA runs anti-parallel, or another way to say that is one strand is 5' at the top, and 3' at the bottom. Oops. And the other is 5' at the bottom and 3' at the top. Okay, and you can see that here. Now you may be wondering, where the heck do they get these silly names, and where does this all come from? If you number the sugars, okay? So the key, and that's kind of where this all comes from. It's, you have to number the sugars. So the number 1 sugar is right here. Oh, so it's the one that's actually attached to the base. You can't really see where I wrote the number 1. That's the number 1 sugar, this sugar right here in the corner. This is number 2, 3, 4, and then this is actually a sugar here, is 5, okay? So that makes this end that's sticking down here the 3' end, and then this all the way up here, this is my number 5 sugar, 4, 3, 2, 1, my 5' end. So it has to do with where the sugars are, okay? The number of the carbons in the sugar. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a carbon right there, okay? So that's what it has to do with. And so we call this the 5' end, and we call this the 3' end, and they're anti-parallel to each other. Okay, so that's kind of the deal with the DNA. Now, here's where